Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, Chris White, your host. This is the live show for technical sales and pre-sales professionals and leaders. And as I like to say, this program, because it's live, is designed to be unscripted, unrehearsed, and of course, unpredictable. I am absolutely delighted to welcome this week's guest. She is a pre-sales leader with VMware, a company many of us know. She's also one of the co-founders of the National Society of Sales Engineers, Miss Yvette Edwards. Yvette, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you so much for inviting me. Unscripted, unrehearsed, that's me. I love it.
And by the way, just the moment you speak, you can hear the energy in your voice and enthusiasm in your voice, which I just absolutely love. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but I see some diplomas above your shoulder. Do you care to share where those diplomas are from?
George Mason University, and I did get an executive business leadership course at University of Miami, where my son just graduated. So,
well, congratulations to him. And so I think we've talked about this briefly, but I literally grew up down the street from George Mason University. So that is so funny. What did you study at George Mason?
Management Information Systems.
MIS. So it's fun.
So it was a great mixture of computers and science and business. So yeah.
I don't know if they have that anymore. So you may recall this. I actually went to James Madison. So I think we were actually rival schools.
Yes. Two great patriots in Virginia. So we love them both.
Indeed.
One wrote the Bill of Rights. So anyways.
That's very, very true. That's very, very true. So, by the way, Yvette, we already have a few folks, or at least somebody chiming in, sending you a little love. And I don't know what is his first name. What is his first name?
That's Sal Campana. He's also a leader here at VMware, a great colleague. So,
fantastic. Yeah. So folks, by all means, if you do have any questions for Yvette or myself, I'm more than happy to take those. So, or if you care to just say hello. Yvette, for anybody who may not actually know who you are, do you mind just taking a minute and introducing yourself a little more properly?
Absolutely. So I am Yvette Edwards. My day job is I am the Senior Director for Solution Engineers at VMware, leading our South region. So I'm blessed to work with talented pre-sales engineers and just great people every day. My passion, personal why, is to open doors for others so they can reach their full potential. So that's really why I co-founded the National Society of Sales Engineers. And this is a great career. It's been great to me and my family. And I'm so excited when I talk to college students that love tech and they love interacting with people and they find out about this career. So that's another passion of mine as well.
Yeah. And when you mentioned finding out about this career, you and I probably are similar in that we're probably about the same age. And I know I sort of discovered it along the journey. It took me 15 years into my career before I discovered pre-sales. How about you? Do you care to share how you discovered pre-sales?
Yes, absolutely. So I started my first job a week after graduation from George Mason. I was hired at AT&T as a software engineer. And the big thing is my last semester or my last 2 semesters I studied C++. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, AT&T invented C++. I got to go work there, Bell Labs, all this stuff. And then they hired me and they wanted me to code in COBOL. And I'm like, oh yeah, I love COBOL too. But anyways, I'm really dating myself. We're talking about COBOL.
Believe me, that was my first job.
Yeah, so I was a coder. So I started off as a coder, software engineer, loved it. I love problem solving. And 5 years into being a software engineer, I noticed that AT&T started outsourcing a lot of our development work. We hired more and more contractors. And then one of my girlfriends said, oh, the tide is turning. We got to go look for other jobs. And I was like, okay, whatever. She dragged me to this job fair. And so it was in DC. And I went with her, thinking, okay, I'll probably retire from AT&T because back then people did, and we went and we were walking around and there was this company called AOL. And so I walked in there and they were looking for a developer and they were really trying to recruit me hard. And I said, okay, great. What's your programming language? It was PL1. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to go even worse technology. So I walked away and said, no, thank you to AOL. Probably a mistake because they did IPO later and those young kids, look it up. I walked away, but that's okay. No worries. Then I walked down the hall and then there was Oracle and they had something called a sales consultant. And as we know, there's many names for sales engineers. So Oracle calls them a sales consultant. I just kept walking and the man walked out the door and he says, aren't you going to come in and, talk to me? And I was like, no, I'm an engineer. I don't do sales.
Right.
He's like, well, wait a minute, come in and let me talk to you about this career. And so he did. And he's like, okay, so you sit in front of a computer and you code all day. And I was like, yeah, it's awesome. He goes, but you have so much personality and you have so much to give. Maybe give this a shot. And so that was my first sales engineering career, was at Oracle in my 20s. And I'm very grateful for him to tell me to take another look. And then the rest is history. And then I went on to many wonderful technology companies like Symantec and Veritas and now VMware. And I did find my way into leadership eventually. So
yeah. Before we get to your segue into leadership, when you first got into a quote sales role, and by the way, I'm with you, right? To me, sales was a 4-letter word. What were your sort of trepidations about going into a sales role?
Yeah, so of course, I really had an impression that sales was something that, you were sort of pressuring people to do something they didn't want to do. I didn't really understand the trusted advisor part of it, the consulting part of it. So I really just sort of, we all think of the used car salesman or, I always had trepidation trying to buy a car because I'm like, oh, they're going to cheat me. So I felt that it was that. And then as I found out more about the career, my biggest thing was presentation. So I know my children laugh when I tell them this, but I was very shy and introverted in my 20s. So it wasn't something that I was, ready to do. And just thinking about speaking in front of people was just terrifying as well.
Really? So what was it then for you that turned and changed and gave you the ability now to stand up in front of people, I'm sure, what you do on the regular? How did that, shift in your career?
Yeah, so me, it's always been about relationships and helping people and solving problems. And when I realized, okay, I'm going into these enterprises and I'm helping them solve problems. And there's a part of me that obviously deep to my core is I love to learn, but part of learning is also teaching others. So I felt it was more of a way for me to educate people, help them solve problems. And it just felt so great to, walk away from a finished product. And back then, as an Oracle sales engineer, I wrote many prototypes. So I was still coding. And, actually IRS became my customer. And I think they put a lot of the stuff that I wrote right into production. I couldn't say that. I'm sure they did a lot more coding on it. But that felt great to have a finished product and know that you really, you left somebody better off than they were before you. So then I realized it's not about me. I'm really here, ready to impart something that's going to help people. So
yeah. So what I hear you saying, and it rings true to me too, is if we're giving maybe a presentation or a demonstration and we haven't connected with the people and we don't recognize that it's really all about them, it can be a little uncomfortable, right? We do feel like we're sort of, standing at the podium. But if we make those connections and we realize that really it's all about them, right? We're here to help them. We're coaching, we're teaching, we're inspiring, right? We forget about ourselves. And I think as a result, we lose some of those nerves that we have if it's a little less personal. Is that a fair way to say what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly true. The fact is that, I love ideation and collaborating, and now you become part of their team and you're helping solve their problems and they appreciate it. So they just make you part of the family, which is I love. So I've got family everywhere from every customer that we've ever had.
Well, and speaking of family of that, I've got to pause for a moment and call attention to a few. You've got quite the fan group. Aaron Morris is saying hello, as is Brett, and I don't know if is it Parlier? I don't know how he pronounces his name. Another fan of yours, friend of yours, and Daniel Edwards is also giving you a shout out. So to all of you who are listening, thank you for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Yvette, if I may, let's talk about the transition. At some point, clearly you were a successful sales consultant, as Oracle referred to it. At what point did you decide to make a shift into management?
Yeah, so the journey takes another turn as well. So, during my years at Oracle, I did very well. And like I said, I had the IRS as a national account, but I had to do a lot of traveling. I remember spending 3 months in New York City doing a data warehousing project, and being pregnant with my third child. And
Wow.
so, that was a lot. And I was very blessed because my mom was my care provider, so she took care of my kids. But then my mom got ill and she wasn't doing well, and I was about to have a third child, and I was just thinking about traveling and being on the road. So I wound up taking a step back, and my 3-month maternity leave turned into a 6-year sabbatical. So I wound up staying home. And between that time, we moved from Virginia down to Florida, where I live today. And the cost of living, as you know, Chris, a little lower here, so you don't need
Right, I know.
And so I stayed home for 6 years, and I just kind of, took care of my kids, and it was great for the baby, but it was also great for my older kids. I wound up doing a lot of stuff in the PTA, actually getting to teach math superstars at the elementary school. So it was a fun 6 years. And then after those 6 years, when my little one started kindergarten, my daughter was starting high school, college was looming. There was more expenses, and I said, well, maybe I need to go back to work, especially because at this point, I think I was working a 40-hour week. I think I was volunteering at all 3 schools. I was doing all kinds of stuff, but not getting paid for it. So I thought it was time to get back into the industry, which was very daunting because 6 years in technology is a long time. I felt, oh my gosh, I've lost all this technology. How am I going to jump back in? And then that's how I went to Veritas, and I found an inside SD job because I wouldn't have to travel. And when I was in that role, Symantec bought Veritas. And then we became this bigger inside SD organization. And we got a new boss out in Oregon. And then he decided to hire a leader just for our Heathrow office in Florida. And at the time, I had been a team lead just to help out because I'm always willing to help out. And so when he was hiring a leader, I didn't apply for it, but he sent me an invite for the interview. And I was telling my team, well, why would he do that? I didn't want to, interview for this job. And they're like, but you are our leader. You take care of us. And so it was them just supporting me and telling me to go for it that I went and did accept on the interview invite. And I had quite a bit of competition, but I wound up getting my first leadership role. So.
Wow. When you moved into that leadership role, I'll ask a similar question. What maybe trepidations or concerns did you have moving into a leadership role and being over people that presumably were your peers, the day before, so to speak?
Yeah. So part of it felt natural, and part of it, to your point, a couple of them were my competition. So there were a couple that really had outgrown the role, and I think that's when I first learned that you have to help develop each employee individually. So those that had gone for it, I knew they wanted something bigger, so I kind of helped them find their way to their next role, and so that sort of helped the team, because I think at the end of the day, you're trying to build for me, I've always tried to build a collaborative culture where everybody is growing and everybody is happy. And I would say that maybe 2 or 3 of those peers maybe were, had outgrown the role and wanted more. And that's probably why they had gone for it, but they weren't going to be happy staying in it. So it was just sort of working with them to find, their next job. And they did. And they thanked me many years later. And then the new team members is helping them grow. And then I got to hire for the first time, which was kind of daunting, but the way I took on that exercise is we hired them as a team. We had a panel, and I would tell people, this isn't the reason that everybody is here. Don't be intimidated, but you're going to be part of this team. So I want you to meet everybody on the team. So that's sort of how I approached my early leadership days. It was very collaborative and, kind of bringing everybody in and being very inclusive in every process.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything that you learned in the 6 years you were home, being a stay-at-home mom, dealing with all the things that, and you said you were working 40 hours. My guess is you were probably working 100 hours a week or more. Did taking that sabbatical sort of give you a change of perspective when you did go back to the workplace?
It really did. It gave me, obviously, as I'm talking to all the working moms and dads out there, or all the stay-home moms and dads out there. there's a lot that you juggle. There's definitely organization, there's definitely schedule making and getting everybody to where they need to be. But I think what I really take from those years is just the diversity of things I was doing. It wasn't necessarily, I wasn't wearing a hat or a title, but yet I was doing many things and interfacing with many people, whether it was something in the community like the PTA or whether I was helping, kids learn how to read. It was just having this diversity of experiences and roles, or being a cheerleading mom and helping kids with their makeup, which is really out of my league. But yeah.
Well, and it's interesting to hear you say that, we're going to talk a little bit about diversity, and I know that's a word that's very important to you. One of the things, in fact, I had a meeting with a pre-sales leader just like yourself this morning, and she was saying that one of our challenges is that everybody we deal with has their own agenda and their own objectives. So as a pre-sales leader, even as a pre-sales professional, part of what we need to do is balance and juggle everyone else's objectives and everyone else's agenda. It sounds like you had that experience both at home and certainly now as a pre-sales leader. Do you see that as well?
I do. And I think that it's just sort of the agility, the resiliency, and listening skills, right? Because depending on what I was doing, something was needed differently at that time. So knowing how to help the person that I was helping or the organization that I was helping, because I had to wear different hats at different times. So whether I was the organizer or whether I was the person to just give us one more idea or the person to kind of cheer us on, it's okay, it's going to work out.
So you just used three words that I want to double click on, because those three words could summarize, I think, our role to a great degree. Agility, right? We do need the ability, I like to say, sort of, to be on our toes. Resiliency, because look, at the end of the day, this can be a grind. And listening skills. If the better we are, I think, and listening skills, the more powerful we are. There's a whole bunch of people, and I don't know if you can see, there's a whole bunch of people that are chiming in. And Brett said in particular something about hiring differently. Incidentally, there's a few other folks, Mark and Shu and Martin, also just chiming in. So for those of you who are with us, I just want to say a quick hello and thank you for your comments. Let's touch on Brett's conversation or his comment here about hiring differently. And I believe this begins to bleed into the topic of diversity. What is your perspective on diversity and how it first plays into the hiring process?
Absolutely. So as we know, going into what happened in 2020 and 2022, the sales engineering career, the reason I love it is because it continues to grow, it continues to change. And as we become SaaS companies, for example, in the software space, and you're talking more about helping customers with use cases, talking to them about business outcomes, it's a very different role, and we need many different skill sets. Absolutely, you should have a desire for technology, a proclivity to learn technology, but that can be taught. What can't be taught is all the different DNA that you bring, as far as working with people, building relationships, thinking strategically, thinking about business outcomes. Maybe you're that what if person that kind of is like the devil's advocate that helps us think of things we haven't thought about. You're the game theorist that kind of says, well, gosh, what if this scenario happens? So I think that we do need to hire differently. We're not just hiring for very specific skills, whether you are VMware's original technology 20 years ago was vSphere, right? We've done much more from that innovation, and we're a cloud company. We do edge, we do artificial intelligence and machine learning, but should we go and hire vSphere admins anymore? The answer is no. We need those that are able to understand the tough problems that customers are trying to solve today. What is it like to be in a digital world? How did we come out of the pandemic? How are customers helping their employees work from home? So those are different problems that we're solving, helping our customers solve. So we have to hire differently. We have to hire people that have new ideas, that have different ideas, or come from different backgrounds, because the more diverse your team is, the more diversity of thought that they bring, the better you're equipped to help your customers. Because, by the way, your customer is diverse. Your customer has many different people there. So if we're only hiring a certain section, you're not really taking care of your customer base. So for many years, technology only attracted males for whatever reason, right? So, but your customers, there's a lot of females sitting across the table, and they want to sort of have that representation as well.
Do you think there's a fear within women to get into this profession, or a reluctance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, this really how I got started with the National Society of Sales Engineers is I was at University of Central Florida here locally trying to recruit more females into STEM. And then, wound up, getting dragged into curriculum and, doing some other stuff. So shout out to Mark Calabrese if he's out there. He had me guest lecture at his intro to industrial engineering class where I met many wonderful students, and, the rest is history. But I would say that I think in elementary school, I think it's very equivalent. I think that there's males and females that are very interested in technology. I remember, my daughter just in 4th grade, they were building roller coasters and they were coding it, and they were really excited about that. And I know there's a lot of programs out there like Girls Who Code. And I think that once they go into middle school, I remember her going into her technology class, and it is all males, that are in there, so I think something happens. I do believe that it's around middle school, early high school, that we may start losing them. And it's just interest. It doesn't mean that, computer science has to be male only, but I think that, going into those classes in middle school sometimes can be a little daunting, just as middle school can be daunting when it's sort of a female type. But I think the more role models they see. I love that movie Hidden Figures they did a couple of years ago. I think that really helps. We see a lot of great things happening in the biomedical industry. We see a lot of females. So we see them in different portions, but I think most of the time when you're in 8th grade, they make you take a test, and most females say they want to care and take care of people, and then they say, oh, you should be a nurse. And then boys might take a test and say, oh, I really love math and science, or like, oh, you should be in computer. So I think that there's some of that, but I think it's also just what they see and what gets role modeled.
Well, and the irony is that one of the superpowers of the best sales engineers is caring, right? And connecting with people. I had a conversation with a pre-sales leader like yourself last week, and she said to me, honestly, Chris, I think to a certain degree, women have certain sort of just natural instincts that almost make them better in a pre-sales role. How do you respond when you hear something like that?
It's really interesting because when I first started at Oracle in my pre-sales role, like I said, I was still very shy and trepidatious in the beginning, so I did a lot of listening, which was good. But I would be there with my sales rep, and maybe there were several males in the room. And at the time, most of my customers were mostly male. But I would hear questions come in, from the customers, and then on this side of the table. Later, because I really was listening and I could see both sides. And so I think at the beginning I sort of had this really excellent talent that was needed, and I sort of translated, no, that's not what he said. Did you notice that he's a little nervous? Or what he's really worried about is what he's going to do with his next project. He's going to make the deadline. So you heard that, so sometimes that was sort of a skill that I brought to the table. Yeah, that was kind of a diversity of thought skill.
Yeah, no, I love. What's interesting, as I heard you share that, I was reminded of something that I heard a number of years ago, that in this sense it was customers, but I think everybody, but in particular customers, has 3 levels of needs. There's the stated need, the unstated need, and the unstated emotional need, right? And what I heard you saying is that you could sort of understand and see a little bit below the surface, and that's what creates that rapport. Incidentally, Yvette, I want to interrupt just for a moment. There's a few. I mean, there's just countless people lining up to say hello. One of whom is Jennifer Chang. Innovation occurs at the nexus of disciplines and diversity of talent. Love that comment. Just another comment. Doug chimes in. He's
awesome.
Giving a call to the Knights. Another comment from Brett. It depends on role models, and seeing is believing. So clearly, you being a role model, another comment from Doug, and then Shannon chimes in. Role models are so key. So Shannon and to all of you out there, really appreciate it. Yvette, if I may, I'm gonna allow myself to be just a tad vulnerable and just be very transparent. Say, look, I recognize as a white male, I need to be as sensitive as anyone and everyone. What advice do you give or have to give to individuals like myself who maybe operate sometimes with blinders on, and maybe we think we're operating and creating an environment for diversity, but maybe we're fooling ourselves a little bit. What advice do you give to us?
Yeah, Chris, I mean, I can tell just by the way you are, how inclusive you are and how open you are. I would say just make sure that everybody in the room has a voice and everybody's opinion is heard. And if something does come across the table that's different, just kind of take a pause, because that is exciting that somebody has a different idea you've never thought of. So I think that's it. I think that sometimes, when there are different ideas or there is diversity of thought in the room, some people will say, and this is my least favorite thing, that will never work, or we tried that one time before. So just let every idea come in, just be inclusive to ideas, treat everybody's idea with the same value, and then I think inclusivity comes with that.
Well, and when you and I spoke a week or two ago, you said something that frankly caught me a little bit by surprise when you said, I want to talk about diversity and inclusion, and frankly they're not the same. And the way you sort of framed that up for me was actually very insightful for me. Do you care to elaborate a little bit more on what does it mean to me, just not only, honoring and creating a culture of diversity, but inclusion as well?
Yeah, I think it's so key. I am so proud of so many companies like VMware that have really been very intentional about hiring diverse talent, making sure that, or even attrition of that talent, because if you aren't inclusive when you invite that talent and you bring them in, they don't have a voice at the table, or they don't. That's the other part of it. So it's like I talk about, I think one of my best friends, Marjorie, always says, being invited to the party, but not being invited to dance. So it's really important that you make that person feel welcome, and remember that you hired them for their diversity and not a checkbox, right? Nobody ever wants to feel that they are a diverse hire. And by the way, diversity isn't what we think it is. It isn't male or female. It isn't, different minorities or, ethnicities. Diversity can be an introvert and an extrovert. I think a sales engineering team needs just as many introverts, because we know that introverted people can be very personable and can have great relationships, but sometimes they just need kind of energy to think for a while. And I've always noticed that in my teams, you'll always have those extroverts that, will share, but it's those introverts that when they speak, you kind of take a pause, because it's going to be really, really good.
Well, and it's interesting to hear you say that. This is something that I've had to learn in my career. I'm sure it wouldn't surprise anybody to hear that, I can easily step in and dominate a conversation if I'm not careful, right? And so I had to learn, I think, the hard way. And I think Simon Sinek says this, leaders always speak last, right? Yeah. The more we can listen. It's funny, a lot of us talk about discovery, and some people think that discovery is dying, and that's a whole nother conversation, right? And they talk about the disco demo. One of the things that I tell the folks I work, we should be doing some discovery in every single conversation, right? We should be listening and sort of getting a sense for, where are they today? Right? Like, what's on their mind today? And it's sort of what you said. It's one of the very first things you said, listening, right? It's developing the skill of listening and understanding, right?
I agree, Chris. And I think as sales engineers or as engineers, we want to jump to problem solving, but you can't do that until you listen. You might be solving the wrong problem.
It's so true. It's so true. If I may, there's another gentleman who's chimed in, Lee Johnson, who I've had the pleasure of actually meeting. One of the few folks I've actually met in person in the past couple of years. And he said, don't forget belonging. I think that's an interesting perspective. So when you hear that word belonging, Yvette, how does that sort of add a slightly different perspective to this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to Lee. He volunteered this year to be a judge at the National Sales Engineering Competition, and I got to work with Lee. Yeah, I think that again, when you are part of a company or you joined a company, it can be very daunting. And just take a moment to go out and make sure that make sure everybody's welcome, especially a new person, somebody that maybe is new to the industry, somebody that's never done sales engineering, never been in a tech company. Maybe we are, hopefully we've reached our goal of hiring differently. Brett Parlier, shout out to you. But that person needs to feel welcome and not feel, we all get that imposter syndrome sometimes when we do get asked to do something that's challenging or something we've never done before. So just make sure you're empathetic, and you make sure that everybody feels welcome in every interaction that you have. Every interaction, hopefully, that you have with everybody is the same. But sometimes, it's not that we're trying to be exclusive or not inclusive, but maybe if somebody comes from a very different background than you do, then maybe you don't feel comfortable or you don't know what you would talk to them about. So I just say, ask one question. If they are different than you, find out about their history, find out, what they've done differently. So whatever that difference is, don't let it divide you, actually let it unite you.
Yeah, yeah, really well said. Well, and it's interesting, and I think this is the point you were making, is that diversity and inclusion, and the challenges that we face, it comes in more, quote, shapes and sizes than male or female, the color of your skin, the origin, your age. It's in simply just different perspectives, right? And one of the thoughts that I had while you were sharing is I think the skills that create that sense of relationship, if I can use that term, with our sales colleagues and our colleagues, they're the same skills that create that rapport with our customers, right? Because the truth is sometimes we enter the meeting or enter the room and we find out or realize that they think very differently than we do, and we're instinctively, we instinctively want to just dig our heels in and sort of go to war or go to court. But what I hear you saying is we should be just as open-minded with customers. Do you agree with that?
I agree. And actually, it's really interesting when you go to different types of companies. I actually went to Altria recently, and they're actually a cigarette company. I've never smoked cigarettes. I don't know anything about them, but I'm walking to this company, helping them with, obviously, solving their IT problems. But it's different, right? What is it that their industry does? At the end of the day, they're looking for business outcomes. They're looking to solve problems. But no matter what your experience is, or maybe your personal biases, just make sure you're open to everybody and you're going to treat everybody the same. So it's interesting. I had a leader that worked for me, and actually our previous boss, loved to do 80s reference, 80s movies. They're hilarious. And I guess they're coming back now because our kids are watching Stranger Things. But, she grew up in a different country. She was younger. She didn't know what he was talking about, right? So sometimes that is a great way to unite some of us, but that is also a great way for somebody to feel like they don't belong, to Lee Johnson's point. So let's just make sure, like, when I talked about AOL, right?
Yeah.
Some people go, what is AOL? So just make sure that, it's okay to bring a little history, but make sure you also give the background.
Yeah.
And just make sure everybody understands what the conversation is. You don't want it to be all like, okay, I got to go home and Google a couple things that were said.
Yeah. Well, and Brett said curiosity, and that's sort of what you're touching on too. And by the way, you mentioned shows. I like to reference movies and shows, and one of my favorite scenes recently. Have you seen the Ted Lasso?
Yes, my husband and I are obsessed.
Okay, so have you seen the Dart scene yet? Where he
So
shoots
I'm only
Dart?
season 2. I just started season 2, so I'm
Well, when you
behind.
get to the Dart scene, he has this classic line, and he says, "Be curious, not judgmental," and that's exactly what you're talking about. Be curious. By the way, I mean the thread is just streaming on and on and on, and it's interesting. Some people are chatting about this notion of being introverted, and you're right. I think it takes a certain level of what I would maybe call emotional intelligence, right? To be aware of are the people, or is the individual I'm dealing with, maybe they're a little bit more introverted than me, maybe they're a little, and so maybe I need to sort of take a step back and give them, create a safe environment or encouragement for them to open up and them to share. What advice, other than what we've talked about, what other advice do you give to leaders to create that sort of environment?
Those that are very emotional intelligence use the 4-second rule. So creating that space that all voices are heard, right? So maybe just awkward silence for a few minutes, but maybe not too much, because then the extrovert will fill that space. But you know, you could call on the person, but that could, put them more into their shell. But just sort of, make sure that you're making a space that every idea is encouraged, making sure that people feel it's a safe space. And sometimes that does take time to build, but just be aware of it. I think just being aware of it and just trying every single time to get different people to interact, or getting everybody's voice heard if possible.
Yeah.
And it may not be, and maybe you talk to that person offline. I really would love to know what your idea is. Maybe do
Yeah.
it one-on-one, and then eventually they'll feel comfortable,
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I hear you saying, and it resonates with me a great deal, is, as leaders, it's so fun. I don't know if you've ever struggled with this. As leaders, we always want to create enough of the environment and sort of, we don't want to meddle too much, but we also don't want to be completely hands off, right? So there's always, a struggle, I think, in sort of finding that balance, right? But I love what you just said. Sometimes we do need to say, so-and-so, I have a feeling you have a response for this, but before I invite you to share, may I invite one of the other members of the team to share, or something like that, right? Where we're not being too controlling, but we're also creating that environment. Incidentally, again, the thread is just blowing up. Here's an interesting question from Oscar.
Love it.
How do we balance technical knowledge in tech sales? He's a great communicator, humbly, but technical knowledge is a struggle when I apply for SE jobs. I have a thought, but would love to hear yours, Yvette.
Yeah, so I think, Oscar, I think that's phenomenal that you're a great communicator and you can build relationships with people. I'm sure that's going to come across in the interview. I think that as far as technical experience, I think we really need to change on how we're doing that. We were actually been looking at our job recs, and some of them say, oh, we need 15 years of experience. And then we looked at it, we're like, that technology hasn't been around for 15 years. So I think you just need to find a company that's willing to take a chance on you. Let them know that you can technology, but do you need to walk in with 10 certifications? I don't think so. Personally, I don't. So Oscar, reach out to me. We're willing to look at you for a sales engineering job here at VMware.
That's fantastic. Yvette, what other advice do you have for individuals like Oscar, maybe who aren't in pre-sales, but they're considering, to sort of throw their hat in that ring, so to speak? What other advice do you have for individuals in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Find a sales engineer that you can talk to. If you're in college and there's a sales engineering club, join that. And if you don't have a sales engineering club, send me a LinkedIn and we'll help you set one up. I think it is a matter of getting to know, what your passion is at the end of the day. If you really are that hands-on technologist that, wants to implement, then probably sales engineering isn't going to be for you. But if you have a mix of both and you want a dynamic role, a dynamic job where you get to go to different industries, work with new people you've never met before and solve problems you've never thought of, then this is probably the role for you, and you should try it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, because obviously in your involvement with the National Society of Sales Engineers, I'm guessing you have the opportunity to speak with early career professionals, what I'll refer to as young people coming out of college.
Our future.
The future, indeed. Well, I don't know about you, Yvette, but I certainly don't plan to do this forever. So I sure hope that we have the next generation coming in. what are some of the questions that you hear from individuals coming out of university?
Yeah, I think that interestingly enough, from some of the females I hear, I think the most interesting part they like about my story is that I balanced motherhood and career, and I did take a step back and I did take a break. So I think the other question I hear is, sort of, how is this role changing? What will happen in the future? Will it stand? And the bottom line is that the best thing about sales engineers is we are sort of the translator between technology and kind of helping people understand that technology. So if you think about how much our lives have changed, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, digital transformation, but if you think about it, tech is in our lives, and you have more and more people that are not technologists using technology. So who better than the sales engineer to kind of be the ambassador and help them understand that technology and how to use it for the force of good. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I mean, we're the bridge, right? And, one of the things I tell, some of the young, and I mean, I have 5 kids, two of whom are out of college, 3 are still in college. So I have my fair share of conversations with people in that age. And one of the things I tell them is if you're not sure you want to go into technology and you're not sure if you want to go into sales, this might actually be a good profession
yeah,
because it's a little bit of both, right? So it's sort of a good middle ground.
it's the best of both worlds. So
It is the best of both worlds. Well, it's funny. It's sort of said it used to be like the best kept secret in the professional world. Fortunately, it's no longer the best kept secret. Fortunately, the word is actually starting to get out there, and that's actually a very very good thing for all of us. Yvette, you have been so unbelievably gracious with your time. I do have a few more questions. In fact, I do a little lightning round at the end with a few questions. But before I get there, is there anything regarding diversity and inclusion that we haven't touched on that maybe is worthwhile to mention, just to make sure that we've sort of completed that conversation?
yeah, all I want to say is I want to have everybody just be more intentional in your communications and your interactions. Of course, we were always taught to treat others the way we want to be treated ourselves, but just make sure that you're being welcoming, you're making people feel like they belong, to Lee Johnson's point. And just go out there and meet a different person you've never met before, or somebody that you work with or worked with for a long time, and be curious and find out about them. And I swear it will enrich your life. So the more inclusive we are, the more people we bring to the party and ask to dance, the better off you'll be.
That was, I have to say, that was such a quotable, repeatable clip right there. I have a feeling I may clip that, but
Aw.
back on social media. That was really powerful. Well, and some of the words you used one of my favorite words, intentional. This is something, and I have to give my wife a lot of credit. This is something that I learned from her. She is so intentional with the things that she does in her life. And one of the things that I talk about in the workshops, folks, we need to be intentional with our words. We need to be incredibly intentional with our actions for the good of others. And if we adopt that attitude, I mean, good things are going to happen. So that was really powerful. Incidentally, I'm going to ask Yvette a few questions, but if any of you have any other questions for Yvette, by all means, I think we've got it for a few more minutes. So please feel free to fire away. But while we're waiting for someone else to chime in, my first question for you, Yvette. Now, I'm calling this program Tech Sales Advice. So I'm curious about the advice. Is there any advice that you received at some point on your journey that really stuck with you and or made a significant difference for you?
Yes, I think I don't know if it was these specific words, but as I said, imposter syndrome is a real thing, right? So, I always wanted to be the most technical person in the room. I always wanted to have all the answers, and you never are. So I think it was just being authentic and realizing that you actually have value. It's okay to say, I don't know the answer, and go find it out for somebody.
Yeah. So powerful. Be yourself. At the end of the day, be yourself and be confident in yourself. It's funny. I often have people ask me, Chris, if someone were to ask you, which of the habits, or are there any habits that you left out? Are there any habits that you missed? And one of them, and it's not exactly a habit, but one of them is personality. Like you have to bring your personality to every sales engagement, every conversation. Don't try to be somebody else. I tell this to people all the time. Like I'm a loudmouth and I wave my arms and I'm a little bit. Don't try to be me if that's not who you are, right? You have to be you, and that's really what you're saying. I love it. All right, question number 2. Now I've asked you a version of this a couple different times, but I'll ask you in a slightly different manner. I'm going to invite you to assume or imagine that you and I have just entered an elevator of a 20-story building. Okay. Now, this is, of course, we both got our masks on.
Of course.
And I turn to you and I say, Yvette, I just saw you on a LinkedIn Live the other day, and I'm about to start my first role as a pre-sales engineer. Do you have any advice for me? And remember, you've got about 20 floors. What might you say?
I would definitely say, well, congratulations. This is an exciting time. I would say just learn everything you can, ask as many questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. And don't sweat the small stuff, and then you'll find out later that everything is the small stuff. So
I love that. I love it. And by the way, that's just good life advice, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Spoken from someone who clearly has led and guided a lot of people on their journey. So those words resonate with me a great deal. Okay, so this is the final question that I'll ask you, and this is the one that people tend to be somewhat caught off guard by. And here's the question. If you could ask me one question, what might it be?
Absolutely. Okay. Let's see. So Chris, what are the 6 habits of being a good father?
Ooh, that is, you caught me off guard now. What are the 6 habits of being a good father? I'm going to say number 1, be present. Always be present with your kids. Number 2, be not afraid. Be not afraid of doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, or be not afraid of what's going to happen. One of the things I always used to say is kids turn out okay in spite of their parents, right?
Very true.
That's 2. Boy, you challenged me for 3. 3, don't make the most of every day, because one of my favorite sayings, and you're a parent, you will understand this. I like to say that the days are long, the days are long, but the years are short, right? The days are long, but the years are short. Be honest with your kids. That's number 4. Have fun with your kids. That's number 5. And be a person that they will be, that they will, and I was going to say proud of, but I think it's more than that. I think we need to be the person that we want to believe that they think we are. So, good question, Yvette. I did not see that one coming.
Well, great advice to future fathers, to fathers out there, and to leaders, because really at the end of the day, as leaders, we are parents, and and a lot of that did include diversity and inclusion in it. So
yeah,
good job, Chris.
Yeah. Really well, thank you. Well, and it's interesting that you bring this up, Yvette. I say this a lot in the nicest possible way, that dealing with our customers is like dealing with our kids sometimes, right?
It is.
Sometimes our customers, they don't know what's in their best interest, right?
Yep.
They're looking for us for guidance, but they don't necessarily want to hear what we have to say. I mean, you know, it is like dealing with kids sometimes. So, Yvette, again, I just have to say thank you for your time. You've been such a gracious guest. Any thoughts in closing from you?
Well, Chris, I've enjoyed the time so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to everyone out there for your support and shout outs. I saw so many great comments that were flashed on the screen, such great people. And thank you all for everyone out there that is hiring differently, that is being inclusive and is taking diversity to the next level. I think we're all doing it together. And I really appreciate everyone. And, you know, have me back anytime, but it's been a blast.
Well, thank you very much. But by the way, do you mind just making a quick plug for the National Society of Sales Engineers? What's your next event?
Yeah, so you know, we had our competition back in October. It did have to be virtual this year. I think this year we are going to try to do a couple more career fairs so that we can do some matching. And our hopes are to have the competition and conference be live, but I think we'll do another virtual one in the spring, so they can practice a little bit more. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, very good. Well, thank you for all the work that you do there. Thank you for being a voice and a leader just in our community. And I have to thank, as you said, I have to thank all the folks that we had on. Folks, thank you so much. And I actually have to confess, I have had technical difficulties throughout this conversation. So I hope it like I have lost my video at least 2 or 3 times. So hopefully I played it off and wasn't too obvious to anybody. Folks, if you enjoyed this, I encourage you to follow the hashtag Tech Sales Advice. Of course, I welcome you to share with others. And again, Yvette, thank you so much. I have a feeling I may invite you back again. Hang around for just a minute because you and I will chat after the show. To everyone else, thank you very much for joining. We'll see you next time. Bye all.